There we go. All right, so good evening, everyone. It's great seeing you all, and it's a great pleasure to be hosting Professor Ross Duffin for a really wonderful lecture today. So let me introduce Professor Duffin. Ross Duffin is a distinguished university professor and Finite H. Kulas Professor of Music Emeritus at Casey Western Reserve University, a winner of multiple awards from Early Music America and the American Musicological Society. His scholarship on early modern English song is best known from his Shakespeare's Songbook. He has also published widely on historical performance practice, including on musical iconography, historical pronunciation, theory, notation, improvisation, and tuning. And today he will talk about Philip Sidney, William Byrd, Enchanting, Arcadia. Ross, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brock. Sir Philip Sidney was one of Elizabethan England's greatest poets. Before his death at age 31, he wrote an enormous body of poems, voluminous letters, and even an essay about poetry. None of this, none, was printed during his lifetime. But his Arcadia, a prose story with poems, appeared in a preliminary edition in 1590, his sonnet cycle Astrophel and Stella in 1591, Arcadia in a corrected edition in 1593, and an expanded Arcadia, incorporating several of his other works, edited by his sister Mary in 1598. Besides these early printed editions, Arcadia survives in a few rare manuscript copies that seem to represent the earliest form of the work, now referred to as the Old Arcadia. This is a page from the Huntington Library's manuscript version, and this from the Folger Library. Sidney is thought to have written the original sometime in the late 1570s to the early 1580s in honor of his sister, Mary Sidney Herbert, Countess of Pembroke, which is why it's sometimes called the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. For all of his fame and high regard as a poet, we know that Sidney appreciated music. In his essay, The Defense of Poesy, he speaks of words set in delightful proportion, either accompanied with or prepared for the well-enchanting skill of music. He specified tunes for some of his poems, and even on his deathbed he reportedly asked for music. Indeed, a huge number of poems throughout the Arcadia and Astrophel and Stella are either designated as songs or specifically described as sung by certain characters in the narrative. But except for a small handful of tunes specified for poems added to the 1598 edition, not all of which have been identified, no original music survives. This fact has been finessed by scholars. For one thing, there's an assumption that the term song is used loosely and that they're really just poems. As one scholar said of Sidney's lyrics, the songs were probably not meant to be sung, but to be read and to evoke a sense of singing. Behind this attitude seems to be an underlying belief that music degrades the poetry it sets. As Gavin Alexander says, it's all too easy to think about music as a force that damages poetry, that bends its rhythms, ideas, and sounds out of shape and obscures its sense and its movement. Another scholar proposed that when Sidney said song, he could have meant that the poem was recited while music played. It's true that the word song is a flexible term. Heather Dubrow observes that it participates in the spectrum of various types of heightened or lyricized speech. But it seems clear that during this period in England, it referred to poetry that was intended to be sung, or it had the potential for singing. Margaret Hannay imagines Mary Roth, Sidney's niece, circulating her poems by reading or singing them, or having them sung by professional musicians among a coterie at Bayard's Castle. In her Urania, as in Sidney's Arcadia, Roth occasionally calls in the narrative for poems to be sung, and given that this portrait of a young woman with a theorbo, really a professional's instrument, is thought to be of her, few would argue against that scenario. So, denying that Sidney's songs were sung seems to me to be something of a rationalization. Sidney may not have had the specific music in mind from the beginning, but when he says song, I believe we have to take him at his word that the lyric is meant to be sung, or at least has the potential to be sung. The descriptions before and after the poems are often specific about the character singing, sometimes to a particular instrument, and to tunes that are variously joyful, doleful, lamentable, or ravishing. That would preclude recitation even with musical underscoring and confirm actual singing of the poetry. The question then is, what music was used? Or, if that music is not recoverable, what music can be used now? The first two Sidney poems to appear in print, in fact, are as musical settings in William Byrd's Psalms, Sonnets, and Songs of 1588 and Songs of Sundry Natures of 1589. That in itself is significant, since Byrd had access to these lyrics before they had been published as poetry. A handful of other Sidney poems were set to music after his death by various composers who clearly recognized their musical potential. But for the huge number of designated songs in Sidney's poetry that were sung but lack music, I've tried to find period music to fit. And first and foremost, I searched among works by William Byrd, since he was active as an English court composer all through the period that Sidney was writing these poems. Besides the two Sidney poems he set to music, Byrd included two heartfelt funeral songs for Sidney in his Psalms, Sonnets, and Songs of Sadness and Piety of 1588, just 2 years after the poet's death. The longer of these, the last piece in the collection, addresses the departed poet at the end, saying, "Thou dead dost live, thy friend here living dieth," which is a remarkably intimate address, and may indicate personal acquaintance between poet and composer, especially because that one line of text takes up something like 40% of the whole piece. All the more reason to try to find matches between Sidney's Arcadia and Byrd's music. In creating these settings, I used music from a variety of consort songs from Byrd's printed collections, and from manuscripts like the manuscript part books copied in the 1580s by Robert Dow, tutor at Christ Church, Oxford, to Philip Sidney's younger brother Robert, and manuscripts copied for Edward Paston, one of Byrd's Catholic patrons. Byrd prints his consort songs with text in all voices, but he says in the introduction to his 1588 collection that they were originally made for instruments to express the harmony and one voice to pronounce the ditty, just as many of them appear in the Dow part books, with one part texted and the others not. Some of these survive in manuscript settings where the viol parts are replaced by a bass line accompaniment intended to be realized by lute, harpsichord, or other chordal instrument, which seems to align more closely with the kind of performances described in Arcadia. Intriguingly, in this case, the solo song version omitted the introductory measures, starting where the voice part enters in the 1588 print, and thus omitting the long rest in the vocal part, shown here boxed in red, and the instrumental music that went with it. Sidney's Arcadia is a prose romance that takes its name from the location of the action, the ancient Greek province of the same name, often portrayed as a mythical bucolic paradise. This garden party painting by Isaac Oliver from shortly after Sidney's death evokes a similar kind of scene with discourse, dalliance, music, and sport. The right portion of the painting, in fact, graces the cover of my book Enchanting Arcadia, forthcoming this year from Indiana University Press. Arcadia has been called Sidney's most important work, and one of the most important of the whole of Elizabethan literature. But most of its 60-odd songs, along with about 30 in his other poetry collections, have never before been published with, in Sidney's words, the well-enchanting skill of music. I should note that I've made several other Byrd settings that are not included today, and in order to complete the musical reconstruction, dozens of Arcadia songs by other composers as well, including John Dowland, Thomas Morley, Thomas Campion, Robert Jones, and William Corkine, all of whom, significantly, have some connection to Sidney or his family. Today, however, as we do a whirlwind tour through the story of Arcadia, I'm going to focus on the special relationship between Sidney and William Byrd. The performances you will hear as samples are from the 2024 William Byrd Festival in Portland, Oregon, with tenors Michael Hilton and John Cox, soprano Vicari Petroleonite, alto Carrie McCarthy, who is also Byrd's biographer, bass Ben Espana, and Mark Williams on keyboard. And so we begin. Arcadia is ruled by Duke Basilius, who has two beautiful daughters, Pamela and Philoclea, whom he protects by banning men from his realm, except shepherds. Frustrated in trying to get close to Pamela, a visiting young nobleman, Musidorus, Duke of Thessaly, disguises himself as the shepherd, Dorus, using the clothing of the shepherd Menalcus while singing a lament, "Come shepherd weeds." Weeds are clothing like duds or threads today. He's overheard by his friend Pyrocles, Prince of Macedon, another visitor, who is himself disguised as a female warrior, Cleophila. I'll explain later. The lyric is set here to In Angel's Weed, apparently an elegy for Mary Queen of Scots, who was beheaded in 1587. It survives in a set of part books from the circle of Edward Paston, but the same music also appears in a Paston lute manuscript with just the title, Is Sidney Dead? Byrd scholar Philip Brett noted that infelicities in the underlay of the consort song confirm the impression that this elegy for Mary Queen of Scots was not the poem Byrd set, but one substituted at a later date. Indeed, elegies are often borrowed from existing songs because they are needed quickly and without warning. A modern example is Elton John's Candle in the Wind, a 1973 elegy for Marilyn Monroe, repurposed as an elegy for Princess Diana in 1997. In this case, the similarity of the text openings, In Angel's Weed, Come Shepherd Weeds, raises the possibility that Sidney's Arcadia lyric may have been the original one. Certainly fits well to the music. Here's how the song is introduced in Arcadia. As if the earth could not bear the burden of his pains, at length Cleophila heard Doris with a lamentable tune sing these few verses. I should mention that because they're easier to read, lyrics and other passages I'm showing today are taken from the 1593 or 1598 editions of Arcadia and differ in some details from those used for the musical settings, which are based on the old Arcadia manuscript. So you may notice some discrepancies between the printed lyrics and those in the musical settings.
Come shepherds weeds, come shepherds weeds, take from your master's line, build outward show, what inward changing cries, Lord, we are past, since such a guest you find. Who strongest hope in your weak comfort lies. Come shepherd weeds, attend my woeful cries. Disuse yourselves from sweet melancholy's voice, for others deep those tunes which sorrow skies. From those clear notes which fill with joy. Then pour out flames, then pour out flames, and in one word, and in one word say this: and bless this flame who spoils the self of bliss, and bless this flame who spoils the self of bliss.
Meanwhile, the reason Prince Pyrocles is disguised as the female warrior Cleophila is in order to get close to Pamela's sister Philoclea. Cleophila is, in fact, an anagram of Philoclea. Overheard by Philoclea's mother, the Duchess Gynecia, Cleophila sings, In vain mine eyes you labor to amend, which I have set to Byrd's, O Lord, how vain are all our frail delights, preserved in the Dow part books. Dow, furthermore, identifies O Lord, how vain, as set by Byrd upon Sir Philip Sidney's ditty, confirming a strong connection between Byrd and Sidney with this piece. Here's how the song is introduced, with Gynecia preparing to hear Cleophila singing. And therefore Gynecia, sitting her down as softly as she could, for she was now in distance to hear, she might first perceive a lute excellently well played upon, and then the same doleful voice, Cleophila, accompanying it with these few verses. As Cleophila, Pyrocles unintentionally arouses the admiration of Duke Basilius, a circumstance that causes problems later on. The Duchess Gynecia, meanwhile, sees through the female disguise of Pyrocles and now burns with love for him, as well as jealousy towards her daughter Philoclea, the apparent object of his love. She thinks of an old song that expresses the duality of those feelings, with two strange fires of equal heat possessed. Old Song is an apt description, since the lyric is in rhyme royal, a 7-line stanza versification that dates back to Chaucer. But it fits well to a lute solo by Byrd with the text incipit, "What whites are these?" Its lyric, now missing, could well have had 7 pentameter lines in some unknown rhyme scheme, but in any case it fits well to Sidney's text. Here's how Sidney introduces Gynecia's song. Yet by the way there came into her mind an old song, which Gynecia thought did well figure her fortune. The song was this. Philoclea is by now aware that Cleophila is Pyrocles, but becomes upset that her lover, busy fending off both Basilius and Gynecia, has not been as attentive to her as he should, and she sings a lament, "The love which is imprinted in my soul." Her mournful song, another sonnet, is harsh in tone and includes the word hate no less than 5 times. Thus, William Byrd's "Whom hateful harms or heaps of heinous wrong" seems an appropriate setting for it. That consort song occurs uniquely in a set of part books, apparently copied from Paston sources. Here's how Sidney introduces Philoclea's lament. For she, Philoclea, laying her hand upon her fair cheek, upon which there did privily trickle the sweet drops of her delightful, though sorrowful tears, made these works wait upon her mournful song. "And hath that cruel Pyrocles," said she, "deserved so much of me that I should for his sake lift up my voice in my best tunes, and to him continually, with pouring out my plaint, make a disdainful oblation? With that giving a pitiful but sweet speech, she took again the lute, and began to sing this sonnet, which might serve as an explaining to the other. In another part of the Arcadian countryside, the jolly shepherd Nico regales his friends with a long song, a cautionary tale for jealous husbands, where, without any cause whatsoever, a lout accuses his wife of infidelity, leading her to plot her revenge by cuckolding him at his own instigation. It's complicated. The narrative character of the poem, the versification, and the distinctive verb-ending construction of the first line, "A neighbor mine not long ago there was," points strongly toward Byrd's "Susanna fair sometime assaulted was," from his 1588 Psalm Sonnets and Songs. Here's how Sidney introduces Nico's song. But for all his words, Nico would not bestow his voice till he was generally entreated of the rest, and then with a merry marriage look he sang this following discourse, for with a better grace he could sing than tell. Nico's long song has 21 stanzas, of which we'll hear 4. If I can get the cursor to work. Whoops. Nope. There we go.
Summer day
Toward the end of Arcadia, the noble Arcadians get themselves into trouble. The apparently irresistible Pyrocles, in his various guises beloved of both Duke Basilius and his wife Gynecia, tricks them into sleeping with one another. After realizing that he slept with his wife rather than Cleophila, Basilius is shocked and repentant, but accidentally drinks the potion Gynecia had prepared for Pyrocles, supposedly a love potion, but apparently fatal instead. Basilius dies, or seems to. An Arcadian shepherd, Agalastus, sings a lament for Basilius, his flawed but still beloved ruler. Agalastus is described as one notably noted among them as well for his skill in their poetry as for an austerely maintained sorrowfulness. In other words, he's well suited to lamenting. His song, Farewell, O Sun, Arcadia's clearest light, is a sestina, traditionally where all 6 stanzas use the same 6 rhymes in different positions. In fact, not just the same rhymes, but the same rhyming words in different patterns in each stanza: light, might, treasure, pleasure, direction, and affection. The best match for the pentameter versification in the farewell imagery is Byrd's Farewell, False Love, the Oracle of Lies, from his 1588 Psalms, Sonnets, and Songs. Here's how Sidney introduces it. Agalastus, when Decus had ended his song, thus maintained the lamentation in his rhyming sestina, having the doleful tune of the other shepherd's pipes joined unto him. We'll hear 2 of the 6 stanzas. For Basilius's apparent murder, Gynecia, Pyrocles, and Musidorus are all sentenced to death, and even Philoclea and Pamela are held captive. In prison, Musidorus sings a lament with joyful resignation to his fate, since nature's works be good and death does serve. The best choice for a musical setting seems to be Byrd's Sith death at length of all shall have the spoil, which occurs only in past and manuscript sources. Here's how Sidney introduces the lament. As he, Pyrocles, had ended his speech, Musidorus, looking with a heavenly joy upon him, sang this song unto him. He had made before, love turned his muse to another subject. And after the song, Sidney says, thus did they, like quiet swans, sing their own obsequies.
Since nature's works be good and wholesome, as nature's works, why should we fear to die? Since fear is vain, but when it may preserve, why should we fear that which we cannot find? Fear is not pain, then is the pain it fears. This time in human minds of native might, while each conceit and ugly feather bears, which will not hear while waiting reasons Our holy eyes, which fill with passions bleed, and scarce discern the dawn of coming day. Let them be cleared and now begin to see. For life is but a step in dusty way. Then let us hold the bliss of peace alive, since this we feel great loss we cannot find.
Despite that sad song, the last, in Arcadia, Sidney's romance has a happy ending. Just like Shakespeare's Juliet, but thankfully not too late, Basilius awakes from his drug-induced coma, pardons Gynecia and the princes, and blesses the marriage to his daughters. These are 7 of the almost 100 songs that I've set to music from Sidney's Arcadia and his other collections, using the process of contrafaction to extant songs. Sidney may actually have known the music by Byrd used here, which is why it's seen best as representative, but because of his early death he could not have known much of the music in my full reconstruction, much less expected it to be used for his poetry. At the same time, the versification of his songs often limit the possible musical models to a very small number of possibilities. Even though other models may be somewhat later, therefore, my contrafacta do fit Sidney's lyrics sometimes quite well, and provide a means for us to hear his poems sung, or rather, to hear his songs sung, because he already told us that they were songs. Moreover, as noted earlier, Sidney acknowledged writing some of his poems to the music of pre-existent songs. And one of the few extant Sidney song settings itself is a contrafactum. So using contemporary or slightly later song models to create musical versions of his poems seems entirely appropriate. That realization has been the impetus behind this reconstruction of songs in all of Sidney's works, and especially in Arcadia, enchanting its lyrics with music at long last, and bringing Sidney's story of amorous shepherds and nobles, their lamenting, lovemaking, and frolicking, to vivid musical life. Thank you. I should say
Barak,
that
we can't hear you, Barak.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I guess you probably understood that I say, Russ, thank you so much for your lecture, which was both fascinating and beautiful on so many levels. Um, really. And now we are proceeding to the response session. And our responder today would be Alon Schab. Alon is a musicologist, composer, and recorder player. He is a professor at the Department of Music at Bar-Ilan University. He is the author of The Sonatas of Henry Purcell, Rhetoric and Reversal, and A Performer's Guide to Transcribing, Editing, and Arranging Early Music. He is currently researching the music of George Muffat, as well as working on several editorial projects, including Purcell's King Arthur. Alon, let's hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. At the outset of my response, I would like to thank the management of the Israeli Musicological Society, both for the Colloquium series as a whole, and more specifically for inviting today's distinguished guest. As a young recorder player, I learned a great deal from A Performer's Guide to Medieval Music, edited by Professor Duffin. Later, as a lecturer, I regularly played his recordings of William Billings in my classes. Above all, for many years, I have sent dozens of students and colleagues to read his book on equal temperament, which I regard as one of the most important musicological books published in recent decades. Now, the praise that I offer Professor Duffin is not merely a matter of courtesy at the beginning of a response. It is closely tied to my own tastes and subjective experiences, and it is not entirely unrelated, actually not at all unrelated, to the points I would like to add to the fascinating presentation he has given today. The reason seems simple to me. Both the books Professor Duffin has written and edited, as well as his work as a performer, much like the presentation we have just heard, inhabit what may initially appear to be a grey area or middle ground between scholarship and performance. Yet I suspect that those who, like myself, reject from the outset any strict separation between research and performance do not experience this as a grey area at all. Rather, they live within this space, they work in it, celebrate it, and find in it all the intellectual food they need. Indeed, as someone who has modestly proposed a few reconstructions over the years, I can readily anticipate some of the objections that Professor Duffin's current project may provoke. There are certainly musicologists who, shielded by the anonymity of blind peer review, would regard this project as delightful material for the concert hall or recording studio, yet argue that all the pieces of circumstantial evidence Professor Duffin has assembled in order to connect a specific melody with Sidney's text must remain merely circumstantial. Some might even attach to it positivist musicology's ultimate pejorative label, speculation. Attempting to publish the insights generated by such a brilliant project in the form of a journal article would almost certainly encounter gatekeeping. For that reason, I was delighted to hear about the forthcoming book. Books are often the ideal venue for exploring ideas that would feel constrained or suffocated within the confines of a peer-reviewed journal. Of course, one of the central challenges of this kind of reconstruction, and here I draw upon my own bitter experience, is that even if we possessed a source that unequivocally demonstrated a connection between the song texts in Arcadia and specific songs by Byrd or other composers, we still know remarkably little about how musical entertainments of this kind were actually performed at that time. Indeed, the very attempt to create this reconstruction is a very strong argument in support of the bond between poetry and music in Tudor England. Indeed, the debate about this bond runs the entire gamut from the underlying belief that music degrades the poetry, a belief that Professor Duffin mentioned, to the idealized unity often praised when Tudor culture is overviewed more generally, not unlike the idealized unbroken bonds between rhetoric and music when 17th century German music is discussed, or between dance and, well, everything else in France of Louis XIV. So Professor Duffin's project is actually an important, nay essential, attempt to examine how poetry and music can coexist, not in the lofty idealized scholarly Arcadias of books on Tudor culture, but in real life. I imagine that one of the most practical questions is how exactly one envisions such an event, in which the poetry was recited and the songs were sung. where would such an occasion have taken place? Who would have participated or listened? On what kinds of occasions would it have occurred? And perhaps most importantly, how long would it have lasted? On a more speculative or conspirative tone, is it possible that Byrd's Catholicism played a part in the absence of concrete sources? One of the issues that keeps performers awake at night today is whether publications such as psalms, sonnets, and songs, or songs of sundry natures, can legitimately serve as the basis for a CD-length album. And if they can, or if they cannot, what are we to make of a large-scale work such as a partly sung Arcadia? I would be very interested to hear where your imagination takes you on these questions, or at least to be reassured that in your forthcoming book you lead your readers into such territory as well. I would also raise a technical question. How do I identify potential candidates for the process of contrafaction? Since I mentioned your work on billings, it is worth noting that in the early American repertory of psalms and hymns, virtually every text and every tune circulates together with its metrical identity. Consequently, if one has access to a sufficiently comprehensive database of hymns and hymn tunes, it becomes quite straightforward to select a common meter tune to fit a common meter text. And here, however, we seem to be dealing with a considerably more complex situation. So these preliminary thoughts, I thought of at least beginning with that. I'm sure that just like the presentation was thought-provoking, I'm sure that your answers will be at least as thought-provoking as that.
Well,
So thank you.
thank you. Thank you for your kind words about my work. It's always wonderful to hear that something you've done has been important to somebody. There are a lot of questions in there, Alon, and I'm not sure I'm going to remember all of them. I think maybe the first thing to talk about is the general issue of the kind of pushback, the scholarly pushback, and particularly from the literary community. I mean, and this is something that I've been addressing for a long time, and so, you know, I've amassed quite a lot of quotes from writers from the time about the connection between lyric and song, and how basically there is no connection. There is no difference between lyric and song. Lyric is poetry that is ready to be sung, you know, basically. And the problem is that poetry by Sidney and by other poets like John Donne and Edmund Spenser, William Shakespeare, they've become so iconic that literary scholars cannot conceive of it in any other way other than being read. And so if you sing it, you are imposing the shape of the music on the poetry, which is something that they can't stand. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It just means that this is one way to hear the poetry. And that's a point that I try to emphasize. I'm not trying to say, oh, you always have to sing this poem now. I'm saying this allows people to sing this lyric that was sung or intended to be sung. And otherwise, we can't do it. Otherwise, it's silent. It's just on the page. And so I think that's a shame. And since I've sort of figured out a way to turn these lyrics into songs, I figure I'm sort of obliged to do it. There was a critic, I can't remember what the context was, but she described what I was doing. Oh, I know. It was Catherine Larson referred to something I had done in her book on song, and she said that I had reanimated it. And I thought, well, that's a good term, because it's like bringing it to life in a way, bringing it to life musically, where we know that it was musical to begin with, or intended to be musical, and it hasn't existed that way for 400 years or more, and this is a way to do it. Now, as to how I do it, I started years ago making databases of lyrics and songs, existing lyrics and songs, and I have several databases of different repertoires. One, for example, of play songs, because I've done, you know, Shakespeare's songbook and some other note that have addressed songs in plays. in the late 16th and early 17th century, and another one on lute and continuo songs, because that's another repertoire, published lute songs and continuo songs in manuscript. And so I have these databases that include, in some cases, thousands of entries. And if I come across a lyric that I know was sung, if I don't immediately sense what tune it may have been written to, and sometimes it is actually clear because people who are writing lyrics tend to reuse rhymes and keywords from the songs that they're modeling, and so it's sometimes possible to say, oh, this is clearly written to this tune because the poet is reusing this imagery, verbal imagery from the poem. But if I don't immediately recognize something, I can plug the parameters of the stanza into this database and get a selection of things that come out. And then I can say, oh, well, there actually are verbal parallels here, or this actually works extremely well to set this song. So that's how I do it. It's interesting. I was at a luncheon a few months ago, and somebody asked me what I did, and I was explaining this, and he said, oh, yeah, well, it sounds like what you do could easily be done by AI. I thought, what, this is supposed to make me feel better? But I think there's an aesthetic aspect to it that AI would have trouble with, and also making connections to poems that are not exact matches, but that actually, they have verbal matches and they're compatible in other ways. And so it would take a much larger computer than usual to make the kinds of associations I'm able to make because I've been doing this for so many decades. One particular aspect of reconstructing music for the poetry has to do with the sonnets, because it's not been thought that sonnets are poetry for singing. And in fact, I started this by writing an article that came out in Music and Letters in 2022 on Shakespeare's sonnets and why there were no musical settings from Shakespeare's lifetime, or indeed from the entire 17th century. There's one musical setting, but by Henry Lawes, but he modifies the sonnet so that it's basically a strophic song instead. So why is that? So I went into the various reasons, and one obviously is the asymmetrical form of the sonnet itself. But in fact, there are some sonnets from that period that are set to music, and I realized that the two that John Dowland had set showed how this could be done, and would be done if somebody wanted to set a sonnet to music, which is that there are two musical sections in Dowland's settings. There's a longer one which sets the quatrain, and you repeat it 3 times in order to do the 12 lines of the body of the sonnet. And then the second section, the shorter one, is for the couplet at the end. And so any lute song, continuo song that has a form like that, basically a cross-rhymed quatrain, A, B, A, B, and a couplet, C, C, at the end, can be used to set a sonnet. And so, in fact, I put my money where my mouth was and started doing this with Shakespeare's sonnets, and in fact did all of Shakespeare's 154 sonnets and a few others besides. And I published it myself because I figured no publisher is going to want to publish something that is poetry and all these speculative, conjectural settings. But I actually got Liz Kenny, who is Britain's top lutenist, and Mark Padmore to perform 6 of them at the Oxford Lieder Festival, and then they were subsequently requested by Catherine Duncan-Jones' daughters to be sung at her memorial. So, I mean, to me that was, this was before I had done them all. I had only done a couple dozen by that time, but to me that was an endorsement of what I had done and how successful it was. Not that Catherine Duncan-Jones knew what I was working on, or even that she would have approved what I was working on, but her daughters, including Emily Wilson, who is herself, a distinguished poet, wanted to have these sonnet settings sung at the memorial rather than having the sonnets recited. So I really took that as a sign that these are successful. And so, I've taken heart from that and turned my attention to John Donne, and I have an article, peer-reviewed article on John Donne, his lost songs. And I sent it to John Donne Journal because I thought I could publish this in early music. Yeah, I know. I'm sure it's colorful. It'd be really interesting, but the John Donne scholars would never see it, and they would be able to dismiss it and never pay attention to it. But if I send it to John Donne Journal, and if I can get it through the peer review, then they'll be aware of it at least. And it was wonderful to get the response, because it was the one reviewer said, I had thought all of these issues were resolved decades ago, and this writer persuades me otherwise. And the other one said, I got 3 pages in and put down my pencil because there was nothing more I could say. So I am making some headway in the literary community with these issues. And I think that, if people do have an open mind about it, they can discover that it's actually delightful to be able to hear these lyrics sung. And I'm coming as close as I think possible to musical settings that may have been intended. It's hard to say. And we don't know if Sidney ever heard most of these things sung, even though he describes them as songs. But anyway, that's the situation. Now, I've covered some of your questions. What have I left out?
Well, perhaps just the issue of the event. How and where do you believe that these songs were performed?
Well, I mean, the event, the Arcadia is a prose romance. It's a story. And so in whatever event it might have been read in public, I mean, they could read the prose portions, but sing the songs when they appear, because that's what happens. I mean, you look at the Arcadia, and pages and pages of narrative, and then you get a song. Okay, so if you're at an event where the Arcadia is being shared in a circle of friends at Penshurst or some other noble household, there's no reason that the poems, those song lyrics, couldn't be sung in those occasions. This does raise the issue, however, that when I was working on this, it did occur to me that I could make a musical theater version of it. So that's what I've done. I have made a musical theater version that takes these songs that I've shared today and several others besides, and links them together with dialogue from Arcadia. So in other words, Philip Sidney's own dialogue from the Arcadia, and then just a few other linking, very small number of other linking bits of dialogue, and turned it into a kind of an early opera, except that instead of recitative, it's Shakespearean sounding dialogue, which is Philip Sidney's very elaborate prose. And so that, to me, that's my effort to try to get this in front of the public. If I can persuade some early opera company or some festival to present this, and have people hear the story of Arcadia, hear these songs sung, hear the dialogue from it, I think that it might be a really wonderful thing as far as reanimating Arcadia is concerned. So, I think that in terms of how it was done is that it would be a circle. I mean, Margaret Haney's description of Mary Roth, who wrote this Urania, which is modeled on Arcadia, hearing her poems and hearing them read and sung in a circle at Bayard's castle. I mean, it's just the kind of thing, a literary circle. Certainly, the Countess of Pembroke herself was the center of a circle of literary people at Wilton House. So they would get together and read them, perform them. And so I think that's what happened. But as far as Arcadia is concerned, I'm hoping that this idea of a musical theater piece will make it better known.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah, I see Neil has one. Please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Ross, that was spectacular. I loved it and enjoyed every minute. And but I am going to ask a performance practice question that can't be answered except by speculation. And that has to do with the fact that those of us brought up on Schubert Lieder and later operatic types of singing. And then having been introduced to other types of singing, have come to appreciate them too, still have to think that the singers sound as if they're very, very pleased with how closely the poetic meter and the musical meter or the musical rhythm and meter coincide. And on the other hand, we know all about improvised singing of that period, and we know about ornamentation. And if I may put it in this cruel way, the curse of strophic songs is that there's progress in the lyrics and the music remains the same unless you do something to it. So I wonder whether there's any evidence that these were, I won't say acted out, but characterized in ways that one could encourage in modern performances.
Oh, sure, I think so. Uh, there's a book by Robert Toft where he talks about early singing, including singing from this time, and makes the point that singers didn't consider themselves to be just interpreters, but in fact remakers in a way. They're making something original in their singing, and I think that that includes ornamenting and changing tempo and doing all kinds of things. Now, these performances were done with about 1 hour's rehearsal, so it's not like this was a careful recording of these pieces. So I take your point that there could be a lot more, and of course, Monteverdi in Orfeo uses strophic songs, but he writes out strophic variation. He writes out melodic changes and rhythmic changes to the individual stanzas, and I think that there could well be things like that going on in performance. Absolutely.
And that's not necessarily the editor's job. That might be the performer's job if you have performers who have the guts to do that.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it is the performer's job, but it means that performers have to be versed, as you say, in performance practice in order to know what's appropriate to do it. I mean, that used to be there were editions where people would write out a lot of stuff that actually was the responsibility of the performer, and I've never been one of those that is inclined to do that. Um, I think improvisation is important. In fact, um, some of the some of the lyrics in Arcadia, nobody has ever figured out how they could be sung because they're um, in couplets over 180 lines or something like that. How does one sing that? And what I proposed was that they sang them to formulas like they used in Italy for the improvisatore, um, for Rinaldo and um, poems like that. That they would be ground bass formulas basically, and that works. That works for couplets. That's all it is couplets, and you would vary it, each time through, and vary the setting of the text, and vary it melodically. So
And as you very well know, not just in Italy, I mean, the
sure,
classical treatment of that is the Singer of Tales, which came out of Harvard when before we were born, um, where the documentation of the singing of epics shows that there was amazingly high level of taking formulas and
right.
making them very flexible.
Right. And when I was first sharing this work with somebody that a very distinguished scholar has written books on early songs, said, "Well, you don't make a big deal of it, but this idea of using improvised formulas for these songs is completely revolutionary. No one has ever suggested this before." So, yeah, I do believe strongly in improvisation, and I think it was a part of the performance of this repertoire. Most particularly in those cases, but I think also in these strophic songs. I mean,
I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know if you know that the Singer of Tales was something I read as an undergraduate, which transformed my thinking. There's a new edition that gives the recordings that were made on wax cylinders
Oh, wow.
in what used to be called Yugoslavia. So you can actually sort of see how good or how inadequate the transcriptions are.
Well, the idea of formulas, some of you I'm sure are familiar with Ben Bagby's work with Beowulf and also the Chanson de Geste. I mean, it sounds so realistic to me. I think somebody once wrote a review that said, "Well, if it didn't sound like that back then, it should have." I mean, it just sounds like such an honest and effective way of delivering the text, and basically, it's all based on formulas, just reiterated over and over again, but varied to fit the text at hand.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Any other follow-up questions? All right. Thank you so much, Professor Duffin, for a brilliant lecture. Thank you, Alon. Thank you, Neil, for brilliant responses. Such a great correspondence between really great minds. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And we're taking a break, I think I can tell you, from the colloquium for the next 2 months, and then we'll start our next season, if you can call it this way, in September. So thank you so much for everyone. And again, thank you so much, Professor Duffin. And we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.